Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Kirsty Livingston. I'm the Head of Membership and Strategic Partnerships at IOD, and I'll be hosting the session on Zoom. So if you've got any queries, just use the chat function. And if you could post any questions or observations along the way, that would be great. And I will record and share the session afterwards. So I'm just going to hand over now to Malcolm Cannon, who will make the introductions. And Malcolm's our National Director at IOD Scotland. Thank you.
Many thanks, Kirsty, and welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. A Monday morning, a Monday afternoon. What better way to spend than discussing key issues affecting businesses? I'm just about to hand over to Iain Gulland. We have a bit of a shared background. About 3 lifetimes ago, we attended the same alma mater at St Andrews University. I won't say how long ago it was, but it looks from how Iain looks that he had an easier paper round since leaving university than I did. Iain is the Chief Executive of Zero Waste Scotland, and we've met a few times over the last year or so, and I've learned a great deal. But I think the main thing about this is he's going to talk a bit about specifically the impact and changes that COVID-19 have made on businesses and how they might be handling them. But I think we can open that up for any questions that any of the people on the call would like to ask about sustainability and environmental impact of business and how we can best mitigate risks for the economy and for the country. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Iain, and as Kirsty says, please write in the chat if you've got specific questions or general questions for Iain, and we'll then try to make sure that everyone's is fielded at the end. So over to you, Iain.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Institute of Directors, for the opportunity. So I'll, I think my plan was really just to outline a few things from my perspective about tackling climate change and the circular economy. And what's been happening, particularly over the last 6 months, as we kind of tackle the COVID pandemic. But really just say a few words and open this up. So I think for me, the benefit is having that opportunity just to chat and to talk about some of these things in a bit more detail. But just to tee things up, so I'm the Chief Executive of Zero Waste Scotland. We are Scotland's circular economy experts. We're work on behalf of the Scottish Government to deliver a whole range of programmes to support Scotland's ambitions to reduce our carbon footprint, both here in Scotland and more globally as well, and I'll say a bit more about that. We're very much about supporting businesses, as well as obviously providing support to consumers and general public and community groups as well, and public sector agencies in that fight against climate change. I thought I'd just start with a few possibly reflections. I know it was teed up in terms of the Institute of Directors around leadership. This session, a lot of people do ask me, and I'm sure we all get asked, you know, what's it like being a leader in this sort of time of crisis? And I think the key thing for me is everything is new. I'm sure lots of people will say that about their job. It has been significantly different what we've been asked to do leading our businesses over the last 6 months, and it's getting used to that. You know, doing things differently is the kind of usual language that we use every day now in Zero Waste Scotland. Even this is very different. You know, as public speaking, all of us who do a little bit of public speaking or a lot of public speaking, it is about learning a new craft. We're all probably very used to getting on stage and trying to do a TED talk and getting some degree of your own personality over, and how challenging that possibly has been for all of us trying to do that virtually, sort of in our bedrooms, so to speak. And even that recording thing, realizing that somebody's recording this and people will probably download this later and, you know, kind of watch it on demand, like we do television now. So I think that's a new thing that we're all getting used to as well, and the accessibility of that in terms of listening to not just ourselves on our own organisations, but actually other leaders as well, which it's hugely positive to some extent. Another thing I've definitely learned is the empathy aspect of being a leader. I'm sure others have as well. I'm very conscious that you know, Simon Sinek, both people will watch him on YouTube and some of his talks. I mean, he talks a lot about, being a chief exec is not about being in charge, but it's actually being responsible for the people who are actually in charge of delivery. And I don't think, certainly when COVID struck, it was all about looking after your people, looking after the people, which was really brought it home that is what your job is as a leader. And also that somebody had a very interesting conversation just before COVID started with a member of my board talking about delegation. How comfortable are you with delegation? And I'm sure there's another thing that leaders talk a lot about. We like to delegate, but it can be quite challenging. But in an emergency, in a crisis, it's relatively easy to delegate because you have to delegate because there's so many things that you have to do, and suddenly you're empowering your senior leaders and in fact your whole organization to self-direct, take ownership for actions, and I think that's something I really learned again, the power of delegation. So I'm hoping I don't forget any of this, as everybody says, as we come out of the COVID situation. I think that's something I feel in terms of my relationship with IOD is really important. How do we make sure that we're not just talking about the more practical skills of leadership, and being in charge or sort of being a director of an organisation or chief executive, actually some of those softer skills, and how can we share and really.
I'm just wondering if that's just me or is everyone
Learn.
No, lost him.
That's okay.
Oh,
Iain,
am I back?
a wee bit there. Are you there?
Okay.
It's a good test for us for the IOD Awards, Malcolm. So,
Iain, are you there? While we wait for Iain to come back, I'd quite like to just remind everyone about the IOD Awards on the 8th of September, but in particular to thank Iain and Zero Waste Scotland for being a corporate sponsor of the award. Oh, are you back, Iain?
Am I back? Apologies.
That's quite all right. You are. We can hear you. Can you hear us? No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll carry on.
Yeah.
So I guess the pandemic clearly has been the immediate emergency for us all, but I guess we see the climate emergency as a much longer term threat to humanity and the way that we live our lives. So that's really what we're about at Zero Waste Scotland. How can we help support our, not just here in Scotland, but global partners to really address those issues? And I don't think I need to rehearse, the things that we're seeing around the world, whether that's bushfires or flooding or typhoons, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I think they're writ large, and all the media before COVID, even during COVID, and even last week, obviously we saw thunderstorms and flash flooding like we've probably never seen for some time here in Scotland. Even the Union Canal, 200 years old, burst its banks. I mean, wow, 200 years that canal's been there. And just last week it burst its banks. So we're now beginning to see the real impacts of climate change on our own infrastructure and society here in Scotland. But I think it was really heartening, certainly in our world, to see that businesses were already starting to really address this. Obviously Scottish Government have set really ambitious targets for ourselves here in terms of net zero by 2045, and we're beginning to really see a shift, particularly how businesses were beginning to address this, setting their own targets, setting their own priorities for taking forward initiatives. And I think that's, from Zero Waste Scotland's point of view, has really been encouraging. So if you think back, for us 5 years ago, we were still trying to get climate change, resource efficiency on the agenda in many businesses. We were knocking on the door trying to get degree sort of time to talk about it. But now there's a lot more businesses coming to us. I mean, that's what's really changed, particularly in the last 18 months. A lot more businesses wanting to do something, not about, do I have to do something? This is about businesses recognizing that they want to do something. And that's not just from a climate point of view, but it's from a resource efficiency point of view. It's from a supply chain resilience point of view. It's about thinking about costs, but it's also in response to market forces, whether that's the consumers that they're selling to, or business to business, or even quite a lot of it is to do with their own employees actually asking questions about how the businesses operate. I'm amazed. I get luckily, well, pre-COVID, I was lucky enough to go and visit many businesses around Scotland, and it really amazed me that, you know, when you ask them, so what was it that made you do this? What made you introduce this recycling system, or look differently about your supply chain? You know, the more and more people were saying, business leaders were saying to me, well, actually, our employees were asking the question. People were coming up with suggestions internally about what more we could do, and we were responding to that. It was much more of a feature than it has been prior to, you know, the last 18 months. So we're already beginning to see businesses here in Scotland respond to that kind of leadership that we've seen from our government. But it's not all just about reducing carbon emissions here. It's about what we procure. So 4/5 of Scotland's carbon footprint is actually from the use of the production use of materials and products, and half of those products and materials come from overseas. So it's that impact as well. We can talk about decarbonisation of our own economy here in terms of electricity grid and electric vehicles and all that sort of stuff, which is hugely important, and we need to do it. But we need to also think about all these materials that we're bringing in from other parts of the world, where the impact there is perhaps more significant in terms of deforestation, soil degradation, water security, having much more of an environmental impact, and therefore a much more greater impact from climate change. We really need to do something about it. So it's not just about decarbonisation, it's about our consumption. We are over-consuming the Earth's natural resources, and people possibly have heard the idea if we all lived like we do here in Scotland or the Western world, would need 3 planets worth of materials and resources to go around. That's just unsustainable in anybody's world. That is completely unsustainable. In fact, if you look at globally, there's a thing called the overshoot day, which is when the whole world has actually used up a whole year's worth of resources. Now, you'd imagine to be sustainable, that should basically be December the 31st at the end of the year. But actually this year, it's actually this Saturday, August the 22nd. So by Saturday, that means that Earth, all of us across the planet, will have used up all of the resources that we needed basically well before the end of the year. So it's called Overshoot Day. So the significance of that is that we are basically overusing the materials, and that is causing all of the climate change, the inequalities, the economic inequalities, the environmental injustices all over the planet. And it's something that we have a responsibility as much as everybody else has, not just to do our bit here in Scotland, but to demonstrate to the rest of the world and to show leadership and make the changes that we need to do. So businesses have a real role in that. As I've said, we can start to do things differently, more radical changes, and clearly, you know, the kind of relationship that we've had over the last 6 months has shown that we can do things differently. You know, almost overnight, all our behaviours, both as individuals but as businesses, some of that has been, you know, quite devastating, I know, to individual companies, but it has shown that, you know, a lot of businesses have kind of thought differently about their business model, or repositioned themselves in the marketplace. We've seen, obviously, you know, we've seen companies, some of the distilleries and brewers starting to produce hand sanitizers. We've seen life-saving ventilators produced by vacuum cleaning companies and car manufacturers. We've seen new food supply chains opening up here in Scotland. We've seen a whole raft of opportunities from businesses who are starting to do things differently. Even this virtual, you know, working virtually was something I know from our point of the business we were still struggling with 6 months ago, and now it's virtual. It is very just normal. It's normal we do it, and we've proven that we can do business like this. We've taken up new initiatives on behalf of the Scottish Government, on behalf of some of our partners. We've delivered new campaigns, all done on a virtual platform. And one of the things that's most significant to us is the other thing we found out, that actually us all working remotely has radically reduced our carbon footprint as a business. So we worked out that, once we'd gone into lockdown, that the fact that we weren't all commuting, we weren't all doing corporate travel, which was our biggest impact on the environment, we saw about a 75% reduction in our carbon emissions. So that really drove us to think differently about how we want to work as a business. And we've offered permanent home working to all our employees just in the last couple of weeks, and we've seen over 50% of employees take that up. And obviously the driver for that for us as a business is reducing those emissions, i.e., the consumption, commuting emissions for people travelling to our offices in Stirling. But the feedback from employees, they're very interested in it, because it's not only that, it's time they're getting back to spend at home or with their families. There's obviously the commute themselves, the frustration of travel sometimes, but there's also the cost. There's a cost saving to those individuals as well. Now, we recognise that this isn't for everyone. There are individuals who, working at home is not a possibility for them. It's quite difficult. So we will still retain an office environment and accommodation for those people, but clearly it's something we would like to encourage not just all our employees but other businesses to seriously think about if we're going to make those kind of transformative changes in terms of climate change. Now, I recognise one of the questions I get asked is that really practical to work from home all your days? And I know that is part of that journey I think we all need to go on. I know how lucky I've been that I've built up long-term relationships with people all over the world in my career, and so going online with people in Australia and all sorts of things, and even in Scotland, is quite relatively easy because you've met these people before, you have relationships. So I know for people starting out in their careers, particularly younger people, that could be more challenging. So obviously for us it's a learning journey to try and understand how do you remain engage with your workforce, how do you ensure that people don't get left behind on this journey as well. Hence, it's not for everyone, but it's definitely something we can see in terms of climate change, that we need to start thinking differently about how we consume, how we travel around, how's our working lives, how different they can be. So that's one of our things that we've learned as we come out of this. Clearly, there's changes ahead, very significant changes ahead for all of us, and our work, continues to support individual companies in key sectors here in Scotland to make that transition. Because clearly, to hit the targets that we're all signed up to, certainly even by 2030, there's going to be transformation. And way of working, are going to be much more long-term opportunities for us all. I'll leave it there. I've now got the internet connection is unstable, so apologies if I've dropped off again.
You very, very briefly, just right at the end there, Iain, you just broke up a little bit, but I think everyone got the gist of that. Many thanks. I think you've touched on loads of different aspects there, and I'm sure there will be questions coming through. Don't you worry, we'll handle that. So we'll pick up the questions and pass them on to you. Can I start with one, actually? You said at the beginning, actually, I'm going to say the thing that you possibly missed. I'd just like to thank Zero Waste Scotland and Iain in particular for their support of the Director of the Year Awards for some time, but especially this year, 8th of September. Do register. It'll be a great event. As Iain says, we're getting better at running these virtual events now, and hopefully this will be a real celebration of some top quality in Scotland at the moment. But can I just ask you, you introduced Zero Waste Scotland at the beginning as Scotland's circular economy specialists. Can you just explain to those who perhaps don't know, what is the circular economy? And apologies if everyone else knows it brilliantly, but I think it might be useful just to set the scene.
The circular economy is basically an economy that is designed around how we make sure that we make the most of our products and materials to basically last longer. I mean, it's easy to say at the moment we have a linear economy where we make stuff, we drag it from the ground, we make stuff, we use it, and then we dispose of it, and that's it. So the circular economy is how we can keep making how we can keep reusing that materials and products again and again. So it's basically about maximising the value of assets over and over again. Now, whether that's end of life or whether you're designing the system, so you're designing you're manufacturing goods in a particular way that they can be repaired, they can be reused, or you're putting in systems to actually capture the material at the end of life so it can be repurposed back into something else. So, recycling is obviously part of that, but there's lots of different ways of reusing and remanufacturing equipment and products, both from a business but also from a consumer point of view. It's about making things last longer.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I just pick up on the point you made about Scotland's carbon emission or carbon footprint effectively, and how much of it was due to the imports of goods from overseas, and how to reduce that? Now, you said reduce consumption levels is one absolutely key way, but if we can't, if, for instance, I'm going to use overseas steel for making wind turbines, is the answer actually to produce the steel ourselves? Is that a better answer than importing that steel to make the wind turbines and therefore produce even greener energy?
So in terms of the carbon footprint, yes, it's about half. So half of our footprint is basically the emissions that are produced here in Scotland, all the activity that we're involved in. And the other half is basically the embedded carbon from all of those products and materials that we're bringing into the country. So it's roughly about half, if that makes it easy for people. So whilst we definitely need to decarbonise that activity here in Scotland, we also need to start seriously thinking about, the stuff that we're coming in, we're bringing in. So steel is a very interesting example. We have the third greenest grid in the world. So if we could use that green grid to manufacture, steel and such like here, using that, electric arc furnaces, for instance, then absolutely that steel, the embedded carbon in that steel, would be vastly reduced to the steel that we are potentially bringing in from overseas facilities which are using possibly coal, possibly other fossil fuels to provide the energy. So that is an opportunity. So we do think there is an opportunity here in Scotland when you have a lot of decommissioning happening in the North Sea. There is steel that is coming off various bits of infrastructure in the North Sea over a period of time. That gets recycled. So it gets cut up basically in the northeast and gets shipped, but it gets shipped out of Scotland and it gets reprocessed in other parts of the world. So there is clearly a very simple level, a very high level opportunity for taking that steel, cutting it up, yes, but then reprocessing it through an electric arc furnace here in Scotland and using that steel to potentially provide offshore wind infrastructure or other types of infrastructure that we need. And that is, obviously something that, people are recognize, and it's easy to say, but it's, it takes the supply chain to really understand how you can put that together. But if we do want that type of infrastructure, we need to be asking ourselves, but what is the carbon impact of putting that infrastructure together, and how can we reduce that? Because that is still having a climate change impact, somewhere else in the world, well, globally, impacting on it.
So we're basically just exporting our problem to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about climate change is a global thing. We're all in this together. It's not like a race to win it first. Climate change is only going to be dealt with if we all do it globally. So if we're passing that pain on to another country, it just makes they're going to have to go harder and further to reduce their emissions. So it is about how do we all work together on this and think about our own supply chains and think about what we can do. Now, the economic impact of doing something like that with steel or on other materials where we can onshore some of that manufacturing, there's an economic opportunity. There's in terms of jobs, in terms of business, in terms of training, potential export then of skills and such like out of Scotland. But actually, because we've got that grid, that low carbon grid here in Scotland, it makes our materials that we potentially are going to export out attractive to other countries who are on the same journey as us. So if countries are thinking we need to get the best steel, we need to get the best manufactured goods that have got the lowest carbon intensity, people are going to start thinking, well, let's go to Scotland and buy them. Let's, because they've got, the greenest, third greenest grid in the world. So there's a real economic opportunity here for Scotland to be at the forefront of this, not just, for Scotland, but actually from a global point of view as well.
Absolutely. No, that sounds very positive, and I think that is a great opportunity. As you say, it's not a race, but there are going to be some winners and losers out of this. I think from a business perspective, there is a gap in the market there for the future. A few questions have cropped up about the home working issue, because obviously, as you say, that has massively reduced your emissions. People have got used to this. We had Jason Leach on a webinar a couple of weeks back, and he was talking about the mental health impact of home working, the isolation, the mental health of just staring at a screen all day. And I know that's some people's job always is their job, but for those who aren't used to this, it is having an impact. So I suppose we also have to think of that as leaders. We need to make sure that we are cognizant of the fact that there are other impacts, not just the good things of reduced emission, reduced cost, reduced time spent traveling, but the other side of that. Is that?
Yeah, no, it is. And I mean, there's two aspects to this. I mean, obviously we're still in a pandemic situation. So although, the certain restrictions have been eased and people are moving about a little bit more, recognize we're not full out of this, and there's still restrictions. So, kind of world we find ourselves in now, is very different to what we imagine in the future. Even if we are home working, we could still meet up as colleagues and have team meetings, etc. At the moment, those are things that we're still not safe to do so. I mean, I keep saying to the team at Zero Waste Scotland that we're not really working from home. What we are, we're actually in the middle of a pandemic, trying to work from home. It's very different. So I think there's, going forward, there will be opportunities certainly for people to still meet colleagues. But absolutely, mental health, as I go back to that point about, being a leader and looking after colleagues, that's been the focus of myself and the senior leadership team at Zero Waste Scotland right from the start. Mental health is clearly a big part of that now. Once you've made everybody kind of physically safe at home, you need to focus on that. We've put lots of things in play to ensure that. We continually go, back over that on a kind of weekly basis. What we're doing, is it enough? We've had staff surveys, but I'm quite clear about, it's not about putting things in place and then ticking a box and saying we've done all those things. I think we have to, continually up our game to look after people and make sure they're engaged and, morale doesn't dip. And I don't have all the answers to that. And again, that's part, I think, of the sharing with other colleagues on the call and across all our networks, is to try and understand how we can do this better. This is definitely a learning experience for us, and it's making sure that we can support all colleagues. And that's the thing about everybody's in a different position. I think we've all learned that from working, in this situation with our colleagues, that everybody's in a different place. Everybody's had young children, different stages of home schooling or otherwise. People have had caring responsibilities. Other things have been happening in people's lives. And I think that's another real lesson for me is, you can't write a policy, for everybody in your business. Everybody's got a very different situation. So how do you really have to be much more supportive of them on an individual basis as well as the collective. And even just this, I mean, seeing colleagues differently, you're seeing their house, their bedroom, whatever it is, you're seeing a little bit of their lives. I mean, it feels quite intrusive sometimes to suddenly say to somebody, oh, is that a guitar I see behind you? I didn't know you played the guitar. It feels quite, oh my God, but at the same time, you've actually got, recognizing that, people are three-dimensional, four-dimensional, and people have different lives and things are going on. And I think that kind of drives you to keep thinking about how do we support these colleagues. So absolutely, I'm not saying that this is just an easy switch to turn, and that's the thing about making sure that it's not for everyone, understanding it's not for everyone. There will be people who will be quite challenged, they live alone or they feel quite isolated anyway, and they, coming to the office is something different, something that they look forward to. So I think that's something we will continue to support, even as we come through COVID, but into the future as well.
Jill has mentioned triple bottom line reporting, ESG reporting. Are Zero Waste Scotland fans of that becoming the norm for organizations? You mentioned employees coming up with ideas. Customers are as well, and that's going to drive a lot of decision making by businesses in the future. Is Zero Waste Scotland a fan of that becoming, if not legislation, certainly the norm, that you report on every impact of your business, not just the audited numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, for businesses, don't wait to be asked. Don't wait to be legislation. I think the smart businesses are already beginning to do that. They're beginning to, to demonstrate what, the wider impact of the work, both in Scotland and their supply chains abroad. Work engaging with, employees as well. I think that's the smart place to be. I think people, you've heard. I mean, I've heard a lot about, younger people, to some extent, choosing the companies they want to work with based on, sense of purpose, sense of direction, wider sustainability, and that goes not just for the environment, but for social justice as well. People are beginning to make those choices in terms of where they want to work, and I think businesses that don't respond to that or show what they're doing, I think are going to get left behind, not just from an environmental point of view, but from customer and employee engagement. And I think you're beginning to see a shift. And at the end of the day, even when I talk like this, I always have to pull myself up. We talk about businesses and we kind of dehumanize it. Businesses are people, all the people in the call probably, work in businesses and run businesses or otherwise. Sometimes we forget that it's people who run businesses, and they are, they see the same media as we all see in terms of what's happening on the planet, the inequalities that we're all trying to address, whether it's in our local communities or nationwide or globally. We're all together in this. We're all trying to do something with purpose, and sometimes I think we kind of, to some extent, blame business for this, or push businesses to go further and stuff like that. But it's simply ourselves. We need to support ourselves, and it goes back to that whole bit about leadership and working with colleagues. You're there to support them. You're there to support your people to do stuff, do good, to get on, to improve improve themselves. That's what we all should be doing with each other. So I don't think it's let's just talk about businesses and they need to do something. It's how we support ourselves individually, peer to peer support, as well as supporting colleagues more broadly.
Definitely. No, very well said. Morag has asked, what do you see as the greatest opportunity towards achieving a zero waste future? And has that changed from how you saw it 6 months ago? The greatest opportunity.
I think and one of the greatest opportunity is that, we now know when we're in a crisis, we now know that, we can step up and do things differently. So I think the biggest opportunity is that we should be much bolder now with our ambitions, whereas we probably thought some of the things we've been talking about are going to be really hard. Even talking about home working or working more virtually, and stop commuting so much, or reducing our commuting, thinking about consumption, even things like food. We've got used to shopping differently through COVID, and that's helped things like reduce food waste at home. It's also shown up some of the the supply chain issues that we have around food, and they could be much stronger. So I think that's, to some extent, the opportunity is we've now had a glimpse into doing things much more radically, and it's, whilst I accept it has been upsetting for people in terms of the circumstances they find themselves, I think we can galvanize around some of that behavioural change, or the aspects of behavioural change that have been hugely positive for the environment and for social aspects of our life as well, bringing communities together. So I think that I still think that's what I've seen. It's galvanized a lot more people to say, yeah, we can actually go and do stuff differently, and a lot of it is much more positive, as I said, both for the environment and for our communities. And there's an economic opportunity, I think, even just thinking again about that resilient supply chain. We've seen that with PPE and all sorts of stuff, and people are beginning to think differently about how do we make more of the equipment, or reuse even some of that equipment, refurbish some of that equipment here in Scotland. And that in itself is going to create good jobs, quality jobs here in Scotland, for people, particularly younger people coming through as well. So I think I just feel we've seen a glimpse of what we talk about the phrase "building back better." I definitely think we can see what the better looks like.
Well, actually, you just got a brilliant segue into two other questions. First one from Aidan, which is about that good quality jobs, basically, you just mentioned. What steps do you see that we can take to attract the kind of environmentally responsible manufacturing against the competitive pricing that currently keeps costs down, while we're trying to ensure fair wages are paid? So how do we become more competitive, I suppose, such that we can create those new good quality jobs?
I mean, there's two things. I mean, it does come down to degree of procurement. So you could argue public procurement. So I know you've used the word competitive and price, but it is about that. What's the wider benefits here? So it's not just about price. It's about, what's that, to some extent, environmental opportunity that we're helping by using procurement. So, not so much buying equipment, but leasing equipment, hiring equipment, in terms of the public procurement. So that creates manufacturing, creates maintenance jobs, it creates higher quality jobs, not just in the production of the product, but actually how do you, service it. I think that's how we could definitely, create much more economic and competitive opportunities here in Scotland by using procurement. But I think going back to the steel, I mean, if we all start to ask the question about, well, where's the embedded carbon, or how much embedded carbon is in the stuff that we are buying? If we start to ask that question and we start to align our procurement, whether that's ourselves as consumers or as businesses, I mean, the public sector has a play in that as well. If we start to value or devalue embedded carbon, if that's the right expression, so we are, asking the questions, then people are going to shift the production of that. And as I said, if Scotland, because of our green grid credentials, we are going to be able to demonstrate that the stuff that we're making, or the stuff that we are serving, the way that we're running our businesses is much more, friendly towards climate change than other products and other services from perhaps other parts of the UK or even other parts of the world, which is going to make us more competitive. Well,
actually, I mean, you've just touched on Sheila's question, which is, should governments be favouring companies and employers with excellent green credentials? How do you incentivise that? Yeah. Hold true to green principles.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's where we want to get to, is where we're saying, well, who are you doing business with? I mean, that's the same thing. We do business with people on a one-to-one basis because we like them, we like their background, and all that sort of stuff. So why aren't we just saying, well, look, unless you're doing the right thing for your employees in terms of paying a fair wage and all of the things that we hold dear to us, but looking after the environment, and you can demonstrate that, and you're not having a negative impact on the climate change or deforestation or whatever it is, or soil degradation in another part of the world, unless they can prove that, we shouldn't be doing business with them. And we should be thinking about the companies that are demonstrating that this is a positive, what they're doing is having a positive impact, not just the environment but society more generally. That's what we should be doing business with. So if we can start to if companies are demonstrating that, that's great, but we should be asking that question. Whatever we're buying, and definitely the public procurement has a key role in that. But just by asking, even just starting to ask the question, is going to make people think, well, I can't demonstrate. How do I demonstrate? And certainly people like ourselves here with Scotland, we can help companies demonstrate that with tools and and assessments in terms of carbon footprinting of their business, and getting them to start to ask the question, what are we doing? Where's the supply coming from? What the impact of this will be? How can we improve it? I mean, at the end of the day, they might find themselves, well, this is where I am now. I've measured it. It's not great. How do I reduce it? And then again, there's organisations like ourselves, can come and support businesses who want to go on that journey to reduce their carbon. Even that's a significant statement to make to your suppliers or to your whoever you're selling your materials to, that we're on this journey. We're going to make a commitment over the next 5 to 10 years to be radically different to where we are now. And I think businesses will need support to do that, because it will be much more radical than what we've seen in the past. It's transformative change that we need, not that incremental 5% a year. We need a step change in the way that we do business, and we're up for it, Zero Waste Scotland, to support that. And if people who are buying things or trading can start to demonstrate that that's what they're looking for, then businesses will make that shift.
It's interesting. Procurement, supply chain, for instance, where suppliers were breaking child labour rules or inequality or equality rules overseas, were very quickly that we very quickly changed that by a little bit of naming and shaming, but also just by an acceptance that that's unacceptable. So why is that not happening? What's the biggest block to that happening in environmental measures as well?
I think that some of that is about almost the transparency of our supply chains. We don't really know the full impact of where our stuff is coming from and what the component parts in our, whether it's a wind turbine or whatever it is. It's not that the visibility is not there, and it's to some extent it can be dressed up as a very complex issue in terms of carbon accounting and all that sort of stuff. So there's still a bit of a kind of mist, which doesn't help cut through. And a lot of people have different labeling. You see the word eco-friendly, you see bioresources, all of this language that we use, and people pick things up and say, oh, this is good for the environment. But there's no sort of like general one stamp says it all type of number that you can all look at and say, if it's anything above 5, don't buy it type of thing. And I think that's what we need to do, at a global level, is to try and make that much more simple for people to understand, and make it more transparent. And, we do need a bit of exposure, which I think we've had over the years in terms of child labour. I mean, we saw the impact that the David Attenborough Blue Planet had, whatever it was, 7 minutes in a documentary, or 14 minutes, sorry, in a documentary a couple of years ago, had a huge impact on people thinking differently about plastics. We need more of that. We need more of that kind of very, sounds dreadful, simplistic, this is what the impact is. We need to be doing things differently. But yeah, some sort of like more standardized accounting or transparency of the carbon impacts of whether it's steel or whether it's, plastics from the other part, other side of the world. We need greater clarity. But that'll only come as well if we start to ask the question. So that would be my thing about our business leaders and ourselves. We should be asking that question. We should be asking our procurement teams to ask the question. Even if they don't get the answer, the people say we don't know the answer to that. If you keep asking, people will start to think, all right, we need to start thinking about this more seriously.
And is there an appetite for that standardization? When you talk to your equivalents in other parts of the world, is there an appetite for that standardization, that single figure, that anything above 5, don't buy it, and that will help drive it down? Or, I mean, you said that businesses are just people, so are governments, but it doesn't mean that they act as people sometimes.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, the people who are, my equivalents in other parts of the world, yeah, absolutely. We need a much more what's the word? Yeah, common understanding of that regime. Like we've developed, here in Scotland, Zero Waste Scotland, we developed a carbon metric which really helps demonstrate that, particularly around when you start thinking about recycling and waste strategies. So we developed that here in Scotland. It's something we're now working with colleagues across Europe to embed that in regional and city governments, to use a common understanding of how embedded carbon can help, or understanding what the embedded carbon is, can actually understand consistency of approaches to recycling strategies and waste strategies, and ultimately improve the take-up of circular economy practices. Now that's a good example for us as Scotland, leading on something that others understand. Yeah, let's have a common approach to this rather than us all go off and try and do something differently. So yeah, there's a real push for something that is consistent, that everybody can understand.
And that is around the world, or are there any people, I mean, not name and shame, but are there any segments of the world who are not on board with that type of desire?
I've not met anybody. I mean, to be honest, I've visited quite a few countries in the past. Everybody really wants to do this now. Everybody really feels they need to do it. I think they're all at different starting points. I think that's fair to say in terms of where different countries are, and some have other challenges that we certainly don't have here. So I think that's more about how do we help them, rather than talk as if everybody's at the place Scotland is, and we can understand all of this and we know where we want to go. Others have much more challenges in front of them, greater challenges in front of them. So I think that's more of the how the conversation needs to how to start. But certainly, I'm not hearing anybody. I mean, the whole idea of the circular economy makes sense to everybody. Everybody says, yeah, that's why wouldn't we make more of the resources that we have, increase the value of those assets, as we reuse and use them again. There's much more, credibility around that strategy now than there's ever been before. It is more about the starting point for some countries. It is more challenging.
I'm cognizant of time, but you've talked about what effect COVID-19 has had on people's appreciation, not only of their own impact on the environment, but also of the global impact that has had. You've talked about making more radical decisions, and you've talked about the global appetite for change, which is all terrific. In the short term, it's something Aidan mentions on the chat. There is going to be pressure because of the job losses that are undoubtedly going to come out of COVID-19. Is that going to hinder development? I mean, what he said is, how do we try to support as many jobs as possible while we start to create new jobs in this new circular economy?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's more opportunities in jumping to a circular economy. So there's a bit of a rule of thumb. For every one job there is in recycling, basically the collection of materials for recycling. So that's basically going out and collecting different bins. For every one job, there's another 8 jobs in the reprocessing, remanufacture, resupply, repurposing of those materials back into the economy. So that's an opportunity, for us. Now, at the moment, we're very good at recycling, but the majority, over 75% of the materials we collect for recycling, we export out of Scotland to either further south parts of Europe or further afield. So in a way, we're exporting those jobs. So that's a credible opportunity for us to say, well, okay, instead of exporting our plastics, we're going to think differently about how we process them here in Scotland. That will create employment. That will create different supply chain opportunities for people, at various levels, various skill levels as well. Some of those jobs will be, high value jobs in terms of R&D, in terms of production cycles, as well as feeding back into the economy where, you look at plastics, if we're going to onshore some of that PPE requirements going forward, where's the plastic going to come from for, integrating into that PPE equipment? That could be repurposing plastic from our own supply chains here in Scotland. So I believe that, grasping the circular economy now is going to be great for the environment, great for the economy in terms of jobs. There's lots of social opportunities as well through reuse and repair, and it's something that is not specifically around let's build a few factories, in the central belt of Scotland. The circular economy is much more disparate to some extent across all communities and all localities, and there's opportunities in the Highlands and Islands as well as there is in the lowlands. So I think it's a real opportunity if we're going to address jobs to some extent and job opportunities. I think let's grasp it now.
And what do you think is needed to make sure that those are onshored rather than offshored? Is it incentives? Is it tax breaks? Is it infrastructure? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, there is infrastructure required, but it is about, is there fiscal instruments we can use to incentivize, the shift? I mean, I've mentioned procurement already, but, we look at the success. It's quite interesting. I mean, go back to the recycling, system. We look at the success of renewables, where basically there was incentives to level the playing field between renewable power as opposed to fossil fuel power, and that's had a great success, huge success now in terms of which is cheaper and which is more expensive. So we're serious about repurposing. Why don't we have the similar incentives to really make recycling a level playing field with disposal, because that's basically the competition. So it still is relatively cheap to get rid of material, to either export it or to send it to landfill. Incentivize businesses to get more involved in repurposing and repatriating that value back into our economy here in Scotland. So that's an obvious example of where we could just learn a lesson from the past and deliver it again in terms of the materials, because these are assets. I mean, we've harnessed wind here for our economic and our community story here, positive benefits here. Why can't we do the same for all those materials that are flowing through our communities, flowing through our houses, flowing through our businesses? They have a value, and we are basically boxing them up and sending them off somewhere else. and we're thinking job done. Now that's good for the environment because it's not going to landfill, but the real economic opportunity is being lost. I think it's time we thought differently about that.
Iain, I've got one more question and then we'll probably wrap it up for the day, but this one's from Jill, and it's to do with food recycling, particularly in takeaways. It's quite tricky, and is Zero Waste Scotland or some of your partners doing any work in that area to make it easier?
Yeah, I mean, there is legislation now for all businesses in Scotland who deal with food and food waste to recycle their food. So we have an extensive program to support all businesses who are involved in this. If there's particular, shapes and sizes of businesses that are struggling, then please get in touch. I mean, if it's individual businesses, we can, provide support. If it's a particular sector, we've worked across different sectors for a period of time, look at common challenges as well as common opportunities to really not just recycle food but reduce food in the first place. But absolutely, I mean, food waste is something we all need to get a grip of. I keep saying that globally, if food waste was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of carbon after China and America. A huge contributor to climate change. I mean, we just mentioned food waste in Scotland is about 3 times more harmful to the planet than plastic. So we need to really deal with that, and we start to think about the impact it has on businesses in terms of cost, then we need to address that as well. So yeah, we're up for that. We have a food waste programme that can support that business.
Brilliant. Iain, it's 7 minutes to go, but often we like to give people back a few minutes of their day before the next call. Can I just ask the last question, and then I'll just wrap it up? It's obviously your job and you're phenomenally experienced and knowledgeable about it, but there's also a passion there. Did that come from a very early age?
Yeah, it did. The other answer is I mean, I'll go back before I met you at university. I mean, I come from Alloa, where in the 70s there was massive unemployment, and I saw firsthand the impact that has, so my early about how to create jobs, we just chose, that seemed like a good idea at the time, but everything we were involved in was about how do we create employment for people, and that's something I think, so I'm as passionate about absolutely tackling climate change and the environmental aspects of this, but it's the social aspect of this and the tackling the inequalities that all sorts of other, society, but the disbenefits sometimes of climate change can cause. That's what really drives me, and I think all of us, no matter what we're involved in, are all really, concerned about growing inequalities, not just here in Scotland but globally as well. And a lot of them are created. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Brilliant. Many thanks indeed, Iain. Everybody, thanks so much for your engagement today, for the questions. If you did ask one that wasn't answered and you still want an answer, reach out to Iain. I know he's very approachable and very knowledgeable. I hope you've picked that up today. We've got challenges. As business leaders, we've got challenges. And I think we have to embrace these challenges and make sure that we do what's best, not only for the organisation and the employees, but for the planet as well. Iain, thank you very much. Thank you to Zero Waste Scotland again for your support of the Director of the Year Awards. Everyone who's still on, don't forget to register for the Director of the Year Awards, and I'll sign off. So thank you very much, Iain, again.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kirsty.